Welcome to this deep dive. And, well, this one's going to be interesting. It's less about a scandalous affair and more about the dark side of human connection. Those choices people make that seem so out of character. We're going to try to figure out why and also what it says about those hidden forces that impact our lives every day.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it because, we often hear about these kinds of stories, the affair, the scandal, but this deep dive will really let us get into the wire behind the headlines, right? This isn't just a morality tale. It's a chance to really try and understand the psychology behind things like manipulation and desire and how societal pressures can actually kind of create the perfect storm for someone to fall apart. Like their whole life just falls apart.
Okay, so let's set the stage a little bit. Our main character, Miss Evelyn Carter, is a high school teacher. And, at first glance, she seems to have it all together. But as you go deeper into the story, there are these subtle hints that something isn't right. Beneath that controlled exterior, there's all these unfulfilled needs.
And it's almost like she's playing a role, the devoted wife, but it feels very hollow. And that detail about her husband barely acknowledging her, that's a huge clue. Because think about it, if you're constantly craving validation and connection, you become so vulnerable to someone who sees right through that facade that you're putting on.
And that's where our antagonist, Wyatt Miller, comes in, right? He's a student in Edson's class, but he's far from innocent. He's charismatic, perceptive, almost predatory in the way he observes Evelyn. The story even says, and this line gave me chills, he saw things most people overlooked, like the way Evelyn's smile never quite reached her eyes, or how she hesitated before answering simple questions about her personal life.
That's a chilling line, I agree. It's like he's reading her like a book. He's zeroing in on all of her insecurities. And it's not just that he's noticing these things, he's using them to his advantage. This is a classic example of grooming, which is a term we use to describe those very calculated steps that abusers take to build trust and then exploit vulnerabilities.
So we're not just talking about an innocent crush here. This is deliberate manipulation from the beginning.
Absolutely. It can be subtle at first, but make no mistake, it's a form of emotional abuse. Think about some of those tactics. Stolen glances lingering after class compliments designed to make her feel seen special. These are all very carefully planned. They all play directly into Evelyn's unmet needs for attention
It's
affirmation.
like he's building her up just to tear her down later.
Sadly, that is a common pattern that we see in abusive relationships. But before we jump ahead too far, I think it's important to really consider the context here. We're talking about a student-teacher relationship. There's already a built-in power imbalance. She's the adult, she's the authority figure, he's the student, technically still a minor in many cases.
So even if she was initially attracted to him, how much agency did she truly have?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Because while it's easy to judge Evelyn for the choices that she made, I think we have to consider the insidious nature of grooming and how it can really warp someone's perception. He's deliberately blurring the lines, whispering things like, "You're too smart for this place. Too beautiful to be wasting your time here." That's textbook manipulation. It's designed to appeal to her ego and her sense of feeling trapped.
That's so interesting because it's not just about physical attraction. He's playing on her intellect, her desire for something more, a life less ordinary.
Right. And let's not forget about the societal expectations that are at play here. Teachers, especially women, they're often held to incredibly high standards. They're expected to be role models, pillars of morality.
So even if she was attracted to him, there's this huge risk, right? This huge risk of social shame and judgment if anyone finds out. It's like the forbidden nature of their relationship adds another layer of intensity to everything.
Exactly. And that intensity, fueled by the secrecy, the stolen moments, it can easily mask all those red flags. In Evelyn's mind, this might feel like true love, a grand escape from her mundane life.
But as their relationship deepens, the story takes a much darker turn. The power dynamics become even more complicated as those lines between teacher and student adult and young adult become completely blurred.
It's a downward spiral. And with each step she takes, she isolates herself further. She makes herself more dependent on Ryan for validation and affection. And that's exactly what makes her so vulnerable to his ultimate betrayal.
Yeah, it's like she's walking on a tightrope, trying to balance this intense desire with the knowledge that everything could come crashing down. And the story kind of hints that somewhere along the line, she starts to believe that this could actually be real, that they could have a future together.
And that's the cruel irony of manipulation, because he's so carefully crafted this illusion. He's playing the part of the devoted, misunderstood lover, feeding all of her fantasies of escaping her life, a life less ordinary. But it's all a facade.
And you start to see the cracks, right? Because the story describes how his behavior changes, like drastically after he graduates. He becomes cold, distant, almost like a different
It's
person.
like flipping a switch, yeah. And that sudden shift in his behavior, that's a big red flag. Like, that's one of the hallmarks of abusers. They create these cycles of closeness and distance just to keep their victims off balance, always seeking their approval and affection. It's a very powerful form of control.
So it's not just that he's losing interest, it's almost like he's intentionally pushing her away to make her crave his attention even more.
Exactly. And that desperation makes her even more vulnerable to his manipulation. Because remember, she's already isolated. Her life is entangled with his hoarding, and her judgment has been clouded by, months of grooming and emotional manipulation.
And it's heartbreaking because she finally confronts him. She demands answers. And his response is just brutal. I mean, he tells her, and I'm quoting this directly from the story, "Come on, did you really think this was love? I said what you wanted to hear. You helped me pass, gave me an easy ride to graduation. That's all this was."
Those words are just devastating. They completely expose how transactional this whole relationship was from his perspective. He never saw it as love. He never saw it as anything real. It was just a means to an end. Good grades, an easy path to graduation, a little boost to his ego.
And then that's when the real devastation begins, right? Like the rumors about their affair start spreading, and then details about their relationship get leaked, and pretty soon there's like a full-blown investigation by the university.
And it's interesting that the story never reveals who leaked the information. Was it Ryan? Was it one of his friends? Or was it somebody else entirely? That uncertainty just adds another layer of complexity to everything. It really mirrors the often murky reality of these types of scandals.
It's like everyone is so quick to point fingers and judge, but the truth gets lost in all the whispers and accusations.
Exactly. And that ambiguity makes it even harder for her to defend herself. To tell her side of the story, she becomes the villain, the temptress who seduced an innocent young student.
And the consequences for her are just devastating. I mean, she loses her job, she loses her reputation, her marriage even falls apart. Her husband leaves her because he can't forgive her betrayal.
And it's a stark reminder of the double standard that often exists in these situations. Women are judged much more harshly than men, especially when it comes to infidelity or breaking societal norms.
Yeah. It's like she's painted as this fallen woman, the one who threw away her career and her life for a fleeting affair. But what about Ryan? He graduates. He moves on seemingly unscathed.
It's almost like he's rewarded for his manipulation and exploitation, and that disparity in the consequences really highlights some of the deeper societal issues that are at play: the power dynamics, the gender bias, the victim blaming that often silences, the people who have been harmed.
It's like the story is holding up a mirror to society and forcing us to confront all these uncomfortable truths, and it's not offering any easy answers. There's no clear resolution, there's no sense of whether justice is served, or if anyone is truly held accountable for the damage that's been done.
And that ambiguity is what makes this story so powerful. It leaves us wrestling with questions about morality and responsibility. And, the complexities of human relationships. It challenges us to look beyond the surface, to consider the nuances of consent and coercion, and the lasting impact of trauma.
It makes you think about how these stories play out in real life. How often the focus is on the scandal itself rather than the underlying issues of manipulation and abuse.
And it's crucial to remember that this isn't just a fictional tale. These dynamics, they play out in countless real-life situations, not just in classrooms, but in workplaces, families, even online.
So what can we learn from this story? What steps can we take to prevent these situations from happening in the first place?
Well, I think for starters, we need to have more open and honest conversations about power dynamics and grooming behaviors and those subtle signs of manipulation. We need to educate ourselves and others on how to recognize those red flags and how to create boundaries to protect ourselves from exploitation.
It's about being aware of the potential for harm, even in seemingly harmless interactions.
Exactly. And it's about creating a culture where people feel comfortable speaking out, reporting abuse, seeking help without fear of judgment or reprisal.
That's so important because the story really highlights the silence that surrounds these kinds of situations. Evelyn is afraid to speak up. She's afraid of the consequences.
And that silence only protects the abuser. You need to believe survivors. We need to validate their experiences and offer them the support they need to heal and to move forward.
It's about shifting the blame away from the victim and holding the perpetrators accountable for their actions.
Absolutely. And it's about challenging those societal norms and double standards that often protect abusers and silence victims.
It's about creating a world where power is used responsibly, where boundaries are respected, and where everyone feels safe and valued.
I think this deep dive has done a remarkable job of highlighting these critical issues. It's a fictional story, yes, but it's a story that reflects the very real challenges that we face as individuals and as a society.
It's a story that stays with you. It prompts you to think critically about your own relationships, your own choices, and the world around you.
And hopefully it's a story that inspires us to act, to speak up, and to work towards creating a more just and equitable world for all.
This deep dive has certainly given us a lot to think about.
It has indeed, and it's left me with a lingering question. How can we as individuals and as a society do better to protect the vulnerable and ensure that everyone feels safe and respected in their relationships?
It's like this story is a cautionary nail, but not in the way we usually think of them. It's not just saying don't have an affair. It's digging deeper. It's trying to get to the why. Why would someone end up in this kind of situation in the first place?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's easy to get caught up in the surface level, the drama, but this deep dive has really allowed it to peel back those layers and see those human vulnerabilities beneath. It's a good reminder that these situations aren't always clear-cut. Good versus evil, it's much more complicated than that. It's about power and desire and society pressures, all these things working together.
And that's what makes it so relatable, right? Even if we haven't gone through something exactly like this, we can all relate to those feelings. Feeling unseen, craving validation, struggling with expectations.
Oh, absolutely. This story really taps into those universal longings and anxieties, and that's why it resonates so deeply with people. And it's a reminder, I think, that we all have a responsibility to create a culture that's more aware, more empathetic, more supportive.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive, what's the most important takeaway you want listeners to walk away with?
I think it comes down to this. We need to cultivate a world where we're not so quick to judge, where we try to understand the complexities of human behavior and where we create those spaces for open and honest conversations about the things that make us vulnerable, the things that scare us.
That's beautifully said. This deep dive has really been eye-opening, and I hope it sparks some critical thinking for our listeners and, maybe even some meaningful conversations about these